get us started and to wake us all up, our global chairman, Joe Andrew, provide our welcome. Joe is our law firm visionary, and he is the key architect of Dentons' global strategy. He is well known already for his service as chair of the Democratic Party during the Clinton presidency. He's a graduate of Yale University and Yale Law School, and he clerked for the Seventh Circuit. He's also an extraordinary M&A lawyer, as well as a gifted leader. And outside of the legal profession, Joe has written a spy novel and a book on economic trends. So there's really not much that Joe cannot do. And as you'll see in a moment, he is one of our law firm's most gifted speakers. So Joe, if you could please get us started.
Well, thank you, Clint. For most of you on the phone, I know the phrase law firm visionary is probably a oxymoron. It's a pretty low bar for most lawyers to hurdle over. But for the fact when you have true visionaries like Clint Vince and Emma Hand on the call here with us, who I'm very honored not only to call my partner, along with many other of my colleagues from along the globe that have joined us. There is a lot of things that I can't do, Clint. One of them is sometimes effectively share my screen. But having been that kid who often had to do the AV work in school, I'm going to try to do that right now. And I hope that all of you will be able to see a presentation that says Smart Cities 2020 on it right now. Nod your head if you can, for those of you. Great. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Clint, as well. I'd like to just kind of begin this a little bit by talking about what we spoke about last year. We had, as you know, literally a sold out conference last year with Clint and Emma and others' leadership as well. And I began in a very pre-pandemic world talking about how I thought that, unfortunately, for so many of the issues that are important to cities and to local governments all across the United States, that politics were becoming a little puerile, and that there was a childish tendency for us not to really focus about these big issues of scale, seriousness, and creativity in order to address the so many challenges all across the board, whether they be climate, income inequality, the questions of civil rights, and that long march towards justice that literally we talked about last year before they became so prevalent and so important to all of us. So if you just think a little bit about that hope last year, that we would talk more about scale, that our politics would become more serious, that we become more creative, I think you've seen examples probably all across the globe, maybe but for with multiple examples that are contrary with our federal government and unfortunately in some cases our state government. But cities all across the world have stood up. Cities are smart. Cities are demonstrating that they're the government that actually works. Even in a global pandemic, a global economic crisis with global issues obviously roiling the entire world, cities are the ones that continue to stand up. And what we have all learned here is that we can't ultimately rely on someone else. That cities need to be smart because of the fact that along with other cities in corridors across our United States, they're the ones who often have to face the real issues. This is, as they say, where the rubber meets the road. And the leadership of cities all across this country has stood up not only on issues of civil rights, the battles and protests that have happened from it, but obviously the global pandemic, mask requirements, and the global economic crisis that obviously is gripping our cities even more so than our rural areas throughout the United States. And fortunately, what cities focus on is not blaming anyone else. They focus, of course, on making connections, not on building walls and building separation. Now, it's important to remember that the entire world has less than 500,000 kilometers of borders. Look at all the borders all across the globe. There's only 500,000 kilometers of them. That's nation borders, state borders, city borders, county borders. If you just count them all up, that's approximately what you get. But the reality is there's so many more examples of connections. 64 million kilometers of highways that bring people together, 4 million kilometers of railways, 2 million kilometers of pipelines. And in a world that is going wireless, so that the number of kilometers of internet cables is becoming less and less important, there's still twice as many internet cables that stretch around our globe between our cities and our states and our countries than there are all of those borders combined. So it's important to remember that the nature of human beings is connections, not walls, not borders, not trying to separate ourselves, but trying to find ways to bring us together. And that's why we need to continue to think differently about the very maps in which we work on. Here's a map from 2016 that focuses on why the 50 state lines don't matter as much as they did before, but about how America is reorganizing itself around these regional infrastructure lines, and most importantly, around metropolitan clusters that ignore the state and even national boundaries. These metropolitan clusters are, again, another demonstration of cities being smart, working together, not building those borders, but going beyond them in order to try to find ways to make sure that we can address the real problems that real people have. The kinds of problems that are talked about around kitchen tables all across the United States, that's what cities are focused on. Our mayors, our city councils, all of the local government officials that have got to work together in order to make sure that those cities work. Now, I know that the mayors that have joined us and the city council people who have joined us, the local elected officials who have joined us all understand this. But for those of us outside who are your consultants and your service providers or seek to try to be able to provide services to you, these are important understandings, important distinctions, so we don't get trapped in just an old way of thinking about how it is we organize the services that we provide you. Obviously, we know that things are changing around us. Now, we know the traditionalists all around us want to try to get back to normal. You hear people talk about this. Let's just ignore the pandemic, ignore the global economic crisis, ignore all of those things that are happening in around us as well. So let's get back to normal. Now, the modernists want to get the world to a new normal, a phrase you heard Clint and others use all the time. The reality of it is that I'm not sure that there's going to be either. What there is missing here is there's not going to be any kind of normal, the old one or the new one, for a long time or ever. Why is that? Because normal itself connotes a set of expectations. I've written about this. There's an article in The Hill you can go to if you'd like to. But there's a set of expectations that come from being normal, that there'll be something that will conform to a standard, that tomorrow will be somewhat like it was yesterday. There's going to be something usual or typical, and most importantly, expected. We all know that what's going to continue to happen as the global healthcare pandemic rolls out, as this global economic crisis rolls out, as so many things are accelerated because of that, that we are very unlikely to have a set of reasonable expectations about what is going to happen next. There's going to be no one of those carpenter squares that can help us try to right things and form a right angle unless we ourselves take different types of actions. And that's why at Dentons, what I've been pushing is that we don't use this phrase normal or new normal. We talk about a new dynamic. There's a new dynamic that all cities have got to work with, and those of us who work with cities have got to focus on. And it's a dynamic because it's constantly kinetic, it's constantly changing. And change itself is accelerating around us. So every single trend line that was facing a city beforehand is still there. It's happening faster. We don't know and may never know what will literally happen next. But we know now that the challenge of our times is how we adapt to whatever happens next with this constant sense of acceleration around us as well. Acceleration itself, of course, was a trend line that we talked about even last year as well. We know that things are never exactly the same. A great quote here from the Greek philosopher Socrates, that no person ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river as it rushes on by, and they're never the same person as well. But we recognize that that river is going faster than it ever has before. And if we want to find a way to swim, sail, or surf, we need to make sure we understand which direction that river is going, which direction the current is as well, and that we learn how to make sure that we can adapt so that we don't drown or get washed away on that riverbank as it continues to move. And these trend lines that we've talked about in the past will always continue to accelerate, but they've just found a way to accelerate it faster. So this is a chart that I showed you last year that's put together by Astro Teller, who has the best business card I've ever seen before. He is captain of the moonshots at Alphabet, what used to be called Google in the process as well. And what he did is a scientific mathematical analysis about the rate of change in 4 basic areas: technology, competitive threats, natural threats, and globalization. And what he demonstrated is you've got this basic rate of change century after century, decade after decade, until just about 2008, when, of course, this happened. All of you probably have one of these in your purse or your pocket as well, a mobile phone. And that particular technology was an example of a dramatically increased set of change, where change itself began to accelerate. Now, you all remember the problem with that, of course, is how do we adapt to change? Because human adaptability simply does not happen at the same rate that technological change, the competitive threats, the natural threats like climate change and globalization have happened all around us. There's a gap here between that rate of accelerated change and human adaptability. Now, of course, lawyers, are not human. So lawyers, of course, only adapt even slower. And that's true of a lot of the professionals who work with cities as well. The gap is even bigger than it might be just for humans. Now, if you get a whole bunch of lawyers together, you get a law firm, and of course that adaptability even goes down even farther. So the goal of people in leadership like Clint and Emma and myself is how do we close that gap? And more importantly, how do we help our clients close that gap? And that's what we've been focused on, what we've been dedicated to doing. But of course, then the pandemic hit. And every single one of these trend lines, and many more, actually accelerated even faster. Everything that we felt and saw that was coming, that we thought was 5 years off, some of it happened within 5 weeks. Some of it happened within 5 days. We at Dentons, for example, moved more than 80% of our 20,000 people into remote working outside of our offices within 5 days. Things that we talked about would happen over years happened in days. And cities all across the United States are dealing with those exact same issues, both good and bad. Things they hoped would happen happened much faster. Things they feared would happen happened much faster as well. And the reality of it is this Cornelius accelerant, the COVID-19 accelerant, is something that is happening in professions, in businesses, in every categorization of human commerce all across the globe, but particularly here in the United States. That change rate is exponential and technologically driven, but humans are actually adapting faster than we all thought was possible. All of my jokes before about how law firms wouldn't adapt very quickly were thrown out the window when you saw law firm after law firm, none the size of Dentons, find ways to be able to provide the level of services they had before. And that's true, again, across all of the professions, across all of the businesses. People found ways to make sure they could provide necessary services, whether it's in healthcare or technology or in all the professions that they might not thought were happening. We all know that obviously, necessity is the mother, invention is the necessity and of all inventions, and that we have to find a way to be able to continue to make what is necessary something that is creative. Now, we've not seen anything like this in the United States literally since World War II. The reality of it is, if you look at the last time that the United States literally came together and found ways in order to transform the society in which we lived in, it literally was that date in 1941 when suddenly we realized we had to accelerate anything and everything we did in order to protect the very concept of democracy that was key to all of us as well. That obviously is the challenge for us, to think about this as one of those events, as one of those times when humans can actually transform what they're doing more so than at other times in and around any of our lifespan. This is a key moment, and a moment we need to make sure that we can take advantage of. That's why we put together a new dynamic hub at Dentons as well, this basic concept that we can help all of our clients address their challenges, not just by providing legal advice, but other insights on quick pivots, leadership skills, scenario planning. And that has obviously been perceived, as you know, extremely well. We have had more than 5,000 users literally in 10 days here. 70,000 people have accessed our COVID-19 insights. And what they've learned is when you think about all of these concepts we talked about. Like, for example, I just showed you a slide of the increase of urbanization all across the United States and the globe. You'll note that's also, for example, the exact same places where we got the increasing rapid virus transmissions. Slides that I've shown you before about the supply chain of a laptop computer, about how it moves all across an interconnected global economy, those are the exact same connections that are happening for the path of the virus as well. Each and every one of these things recognizes that we have got to find a way to make sure that in a globalized economy that we focus on all of those issues that are working with us. Let's just take one of them. It clearly is accelerating: income inequality. Here's a list of 26 people who are 26 billionaires. Those 26 people equal 50% of the world's population when it comes to wealth. Those 26 people have the same wealth of 3.6 billion people around the globe. Clearly, as that continues to accelerate, we have to find a way to address it. That comes in little ways and comes in big ways. Even this whole question about when will we go back to the office hides a whole series of income disparities that happen in each one of our businesses, in each one of our cities. It may be easy for people like myself or Clint or Emma to go back to the office. We're going to drive a nice car right into a garage and park and go up. But those people who are part of our team have got to take public transportation. They have to figure out childcare. They have to figure out a whole series of day-to-day problems that are caused now that are going to increase income inequality, not decrease as well. So even the question of who's in the office or when you're in the office is a simple question of income inequality. It's also a question of racial justice and so many other issues that we know are important to us. And we have to make sure that we really probe each and every one of these concepts of what we considered to be normal in the past. And in this new dynamic, what will that mean for all of us? Because obviously we want to get people back together again. We want to get people in the room because we all recognize that the smartest person in any given room is the entire room. It's obviously all of us together, finding ways to share our backgrounds and experiences, getting that excitement and creativity that comes from bringing different perspectives together in order to address a problem. Whether it's a problem for a city, whether it's a problem for a business, it's important to be able to get people back in the room. Now, of course, that only works if everyone's allowed in the room. Last year, we talked about how the top jobs where women are outnumbered by men simply named John. So there are more men who are named John who are Fortune 500 chief executives than there are women. But even more shocking is there's only 4 African-American CEOs in the Fortune 500. On the right hand, you still see those are all the executives that are named John. So there's exactly 5 times as many chief executives who simply share the same first name than happen to share being African-American. We need to find ways to be able to work on these given issues together. Is this great quote from Barack Obama summarizing what Martin Luther King said: the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, is key. Change does take a long time, but it does happen. And each of us need to find our way that we will work for social change as part of this mosaic of everyone working together to justice. This is a key issue, obviously, every year for smart cities, but particularly this year as well, as multitudes of people have come out into the streets and said, enough is enough. Now, when you look at that long arc of the moral universe and how it bends towards justice, there are examples, however, when it takes just about a 90-degree turn. Back to that definition of normal, that right degree turn, that device that uses you to make a right degree as well. There are examples where American views flip very quickly. For example, like on gay rights. And if you look at the polling data, American voters and American citizens' support for Black Lives Matter has dramatically increased in a very short time. And so if you go back to that fulcrum of change as well, you realize whether it's the Arab Spring or this 4th wave of feminism, gay rights, the Me Too movement, the March for Our Lives about gun control, and Black Lives Matters, you can make a right turn. You can take something that might be gently and slowly bending that arc to justice and get there very quickly. And that's got to be ultimately the goal for each and every one of us in this new dynamic, is how do we use this fulcrum of change to simply bend that line let's get to justice quicker than we ever could before. And that's about cities all across the United States, about mayors and local elected officials and all of us who support them, making sure that we're fighting with them in this forward of change to try to bend up towards that arc of justice as quickly and positively as happened. So when I spoke to you last year, I happened to be in Washington, D.C. And I was just telling Clint that I'm now sitting in my home in the mountains of Telluride, Colorado, which means I got to drive across the United States. Now, there's a lot of funny stories about driving across the United States in the middle of a pandemic as well. You see a lot of masks east of the Mississippi, not so much of them west of the Mississippi as well. Most things are closed during that process. But I got to drive through and around the great cities of the United States, where the fulcrum of change is happening faster than ever has before, where cities are leading on these social issues that clearly are discussed around the kitchen tables of all of Americans right now. Mayors are standing up, city councils are standing up. Their cities and their mayors are being perceived as smarter than ever before. I got to stop at two places that were both closed, but you still get to wander around and see a lot about them. And they're only about an hour and 45 minutes apart. The Harry Truman Library Museum and Dwight Eisenhower's Library and Museum. If you're taking 70 straight across, you're gonna obviously run right in to both of those places as well. And what I was reminded about was back in those tragic and difficult times of World War II, when so much of the United States was tested, responded, and then so many people came back after that war, not only to a new America, but to a willingness to change America for the better. I was reminded about how these two political figures, two presidents from different parties, literally formed the world we know of. That you'll see Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower there as well. And in Eisenhower's farewell address, he said, "This world of ours must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate, and be instead a proud confederation of mutual trust and respect." I know that's what mayors and city councils are looking for all across the United States in the face of others who will try to pull people apart, who will focus on those borders rather than those connections. But the reality of it is that smart cities, good cities, are cities that are all about a proud confederation of mutual trust and respect as well. And that's why together we need to imagine a better world. Cities are leading that way. And the smartest cities are the ones literally in the forefront. We just hope we at Dentons all across the globe, but particularly here in the United States, can help you along that journey, can make sure that as you deal with each and every one of the crises that you have in front of you today, but more importantly, the ones that we know will continue to come in this new dynamic, is all as those trend lines that we've talked about for years have suddenly accelerated, that we can be there to help, that we can focus again on our connections and making sure that that smartest person in the room is always the room, and Dentons doing everything it possibly can to create that room for you. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. And Clint, I'll turn this back to you. I hope I had an opportunity just to set out some of the issues and give just a moment of inspiration to talk about what we can all do together.